Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. There are many things to love about Vermont. High on the list, pure maple syrup and our diversity of birds. Today we're going to talk about a project that brings together our sugar bushes and our feathered friends. It's called Bird Friendly Maple. To learn more, I'm joined by Steve Hagenbu, who is a conservation biologist with Audubon, Vermont, and Amanda Voyer, who is the executive director of the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association. Thank you both for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So a little bit about maple, but first, Steve, we're going to get started with this project. You started it in 2015. Yep. You talked with us a little bit about it. Refresh us about how the Bird Friendly Maple project is going and what it is.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So you kind of hit on it a little bit when you introduced us here, that Vermont is known for maple syrup production and certainly known for birds, probably better known for maple than birds. We do know that Vermont is #1 in maple production in the U.S. Every year we get about close to 50% of the entire U.S. crop of maple syrup comes out of Vermont. What fewer people realize is that we're also the summer nesting habitat for some of the greatest number of bird species of anywhere else in the U.S. And so this is a project that looks at both those aspects of the forest. These are two things that rely upon the forest, birds and maple, and is designed to help to promote both pure maple products and bird conservation.
Okay, so and how has that expanded?
Well, back in 2015, when I was here before, we were working with our partners, the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association and the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, really just kind of getting this project underway and doing some outreach to the maple industry here in Vermont to let them know about it. And since that time, I've had the opportunity to work with just about 37 different maple producers from around Vermont, to work closely with them to get them to think intentionally about incorporating bird habitat into the management of their sugar bushes.
So what does that mean? What actions are you taking to make their forest a better place for birds?
Yeah, well, it's you know, you have to think about a sugar bush, which again, for folks, kind of a reminder, it's the forest that we manage primarily for maple production. And what we really want people to think about is being intentional about including birds in the management of that forest. So some of the birds that we think about and we get people to think about are the bird that you see right now, which is the Scarlet Tanager. This is a migratory songbird that in the wintertime is in South America, and just now it's back here in Vermont looking for places to nest in our forests like sugar bushes. So when we get people to think about what are the actions that we can take and how do we get producers to kind of come on board with this, I'll break it down into 3 basic concepts. First, more than maple. So in our sugar bushes, we'd like to see a diversity of tree species. And there's other reasons besides bird habitat why that's important to have things other than sugar maple. Another thing we like people to think about is to think of the forest in layers. So it's not just those tall canopy trees that we're tapping that are an important component of that forest. We also want young trees growing in the understory and midstory. And I also get people to think about mess is best. So kind of keeping a messy forest as opposed to that more park-like look of forest is really important because it has things like standing dead trees that we saw there just a moment ago, as well as lots of downed woody material. And these are all components of bird habitat, as well as adding to other values, ecological values in our forests.
It could be good news. So what are some other benefits of managing a forest in this way?
With managing in birds in mind, yeah. So there's additional benefits both to the producer, you know, who typically wants to have a forest that's going to be there for the long term in terms of maple production. And if we maintain that species diversity, when we do have kind of outbreaks of insect pests, like forest tent caterpillar is one that we've seen in recent years, really prefers sugar maple. So if we have a monoculture of sugar maple, the impacts of some of those things like insect outbreaks can be much higher. Whereas if we have a diversity, we have a little bit of tree species, we have a little bit more of a hedge to buffer against some of those aspects that are negative on the forest. And then the big one today that we talk a lot about is certainly climate change and how making our forests of any kind, including sugar bushes, more resilient and adaptable to the changes that are coming is going to help keep that sugar bush more productive in the long term. And managing for birds helps to do that.
Fantastic. And for those people that might not own a sugar bush, what can they do to support your efforts?
Yeah, so all of the producers that we're working with, when I say we have 37 of them, those are folks who have agreed to manage their sugar bush in a way that will add bird habitat to sap production. And when they agree to do that, they actually are able to get some marketing materials, like the label that we see on this maple syrup container right here, to denote their participation in the project. It's a way to kind of say, here's what we're doing to maybe stand out on the marketplace a little bit. You know, Vermont has a lot of maple syrup, and so this is a way to kind of distinguish yourself when you're thinking intentionally about maple syrup. So, so anybody who's not a maple producer or doesn't own land can still support this effort by going out and looking for syrup that's bearing this label.
Fantastic. Well, let me bring Amanda into the conversation. This is such a great idea. First, what can you tell us about the 2019 season?
It was definitely a later start to the season this year. We had a lot of snow in Vermont, which impacted a lot of sort of early tapping efforts, as well as just early collection time. So it was a later start, but overall it still ended up being a pretty good, productive season.
Oh, good. So was it a lot different from recent years? How did it compare to the last two?
Yeah, the last couple of years we were coming off some banner years, so they were both record-breaking years. This year, with that later start, actually looks a little more typical to seasons from you know, a decade ago, where really the start of the production season started much later in the season, March and April, really. So very different than the last couple of seasons, but not totally off course from what we've seen in the past.
Still pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay. And your organization was one of the first to really support this bird-friendly maple. Why is that? Why?
Well, just as Steve said, it makes a lot of sense. Maple producers look at themselves, view themselves, rightfully so, as stewards of the land. So to support their own production, it makes sense to manage their forests in a way that protects that long-term health and sustainability. So it's a natural fit to do that with songbirds in mind as well.
And what are some of the challenges that Vermont maple makers are facing right now?
Again, what Steve touched on is some of the bigger weather events that occur with some of the climate change, whether that's a windstorm, whether that's an ice storm, whether that's drought, and some of the invasive species issues. So certainly managing your forest, again, in a way that makes it as strong as it can be, and ways that also support that habitat for songbirds as well.
Okay, and there's been enormous growth, as we said, on maple production in recent seasons. What does your crystal ball say about what might be coming in the future for continued market potential?
Yeah, I mean, what's great is maple is only produced in a very small region of the world in North America. So that market potential has always been a great potential, even domestically. And what we're seeing a lot more now is just an educated consumer who's interested in their food source, where their food comes from. And we're seeing maple introduced in a lot more health products like granola bars, cereal products, things of that nature. But also it's being used more increasingly in things like distilled spirits and breweries and that sort of thing. So just the use for maple has expanded quite a bit.
So the future is pretty rosy and
yeah.
bright. So just to bring you back in, Steve, so is it difficult what you're asking people to do, or is it kind of common sense? And have most people been dealing with their sugar bushes in this way, or well, how would you say we stand?
Yeah, what we find a lot of times is that many producers are already managing their sugar bushes in ways that are already supporting good bird habitat, and so this provides, for those folks, it provides a way to recognize them for that good work that they're already doing. But some of the places where we do find gaps between what the sugar bush is like today and what ideally we'd like it to see, again, is that tree species diversity aspect. It's good to have at least 25% of the trees in a sugar bush be something other than sugar maple. And then also just planning for how do we get that next cohort of trees, that young growth coming in the understory. How do we manage in a way that actually gets that? Sometimes you actually have to cut a maple tree in order to get that regeneration. So, but by and large, everybody who's been relating with us has been very supportive and really likes the idea of how to use that as a way, both for the health of their forest and supporting birds, but as a way to, again, to market themselves.
So are we talking about most of the sugar bushes? What percentage is on to this, and for those that want to be more involved?
Yeah, so right now it's a very small percentage. So we're about 37 producers, as I mentioned, and we've got another 30-ish in the queue right now that are still waiting for me to be able to get out there and visit with them. So it's a very small percentage. I don't know if we know how many sugar makers there actually are. I mean, VMSMA, your organization has over 1,000 members, so it's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. But really just reaching out to us at Audubon, Vermont, and saying, hey, I'd like to learn more about this, I'd like to figure out how to get involved, would be the first step in doing that.
Right. And so what happens when you come out to a forest? What do you do?
Yeah, I basically conduct a full inventory and assessment of the sugar bush itself, and I look at things that are specific to habitat variables. So as I mentioned before, kind of how much of that layering of vegetation do you have in the forest? What is the diversity of tree species? Do you have those standing dead trees out there? Do you have dead wood on the ground? Are there invasive plants? And we look at all that, and we have some standards, criteria that we've developed with our partners to define what a bird-friendly sugar bush is. So we'll look at that, the results of that inventory, and match it up with the guidelines that we've established, and give the producer a report that says, here's where you are, here's what we're looking for, here's what you could do to minimize that gap.
All right, awesome. And how do they, let's first of all, how can viewers learn more about your organization, the Vermont Maple Makers Association?
Go to our website, vermontmaple.org.
Okay, well Vermont is spelled out.
Yes.
And let me point out, you can also get information about Steve's wonderful project with the Audubon Society and how, and I'm going to tell you how to get there. There it is, vt.audubon.org/conservation, and you can click on Working Lands for the bird-friendly maple syrup program. Steve and Amanda, it's great to have you in here and to realize how our forests are being really looked at and taken care of so well. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Across the Fence, I'm Fran Stoddard.